greatest hockey player who ever lived, in my opinion. So that's the starting point. If anybody who cares about the game, I think it's hard not to care about Bobby Orr and his place in the game. I think beyond that, he's one of those rare athletes who I think are originals. There are a lot of great, not just athletes. I could extend it to musicians or artists or whatever. Because I think it's part of the same thing. If you think of most of the great athletes are kind of a variation on a theme that they're the next evolution of something that came before them, and you can kind of put them in a category and say, well, he's sort of like so and so. Again, same with musicians. You could say, well, it's somebody following along the lines of his influences clearly are. Bobby Orr is one of those rare ones who's an original. He's a one-off. He arrives fully formed, really as a kid almost, and reinvents or reimagines the game. Or at least his position playing defense in hockey, and I think I always come back to the same kind of points of comparison, but they're not in sports generally. It's Charlie Parker or Jimi Hendrix or those kind of people who take a familiar form, or a familiar chord progression and invert it somehow. I think Orr takes hockey and sees it in a different way, and because of the skills he has, which are unique. He can live it out. He can express it in a way that no one's seen before. Because I think we've over-sentimentalized hockey in this country a lot. There's become an industry in sentimentalizing hockey and kind of painting everything in these kind of warm and fuzzy tones of and everybody's nice and everybody gets along and everybody's supportive of everybody else. And Bobby Orr's family is not different than anybody else's, I don't think. But it was a working class. He came out of a working class Ontario town. It was a bit of a rough and tumble place. His family have warts, like all of our families do, and I wanted to write about that. Obviously, yeah, it's the classic hockey story, but it's not the over sentimentalized version. People drink. People yell at each other. There is jealousy. Sometimes you got to go to grandma's house to get away from it. The parents aren't always standing supportively at the side of the rink cheering you on, or like Walter Gretzky getting you to skate around cones in the backyard. It's not always like that. And I think that's more real than a lot of than the myth that's been created. Now, of course, he came along at a time when it wasn't quite so normal to reveal and merchandise and exploit your own personal history, right? It's become part of the game now that you give all of that biography or some version of that biography away as part of the package, that you create this thing around yourself where people are supposed to know all these things because that's the up close and personal approach to sport. Or came along at a time when you could have a private life. But I think after that, and as he became a kind of celebrity that really hadn't seen in the NHL before, it came at a time when athletes were taking on those different kind of roles, or we were being. You remember, it's the same time as Joe Namath. That's the real point of comparison. So athletes as something else, as kind of movie stars, or very consciously chose to close off parts of his life from the world, from the press, from everybody. I know why I think he did that, and I think it's because he's a kid from Parry Sound who, in some ways, was thrown into a world way over his head. He came out of a town that was really mired in the 1940s, and he was thrown into 1960s Boston. It was a different place, different world. He was, like most hockey players, he was undereducated, underexperienced. Al Eagleson he relied on for everything. And I think there's a part of him that was always running away from that small town past. And there's things in the book that, little anecdotes and kind of telling moments which suggest that I think the last thing he ever wanted people to know was that he was a kind of a small town hick. Well, there are a lot of them. Now I kind of knew that going in. Then there's a reason why there's no other Orr biography out there. This is it. There has never been one, and I'm not sure there ever will be another one, because people have been unwilling to try and work around Bobby. Now, I met with him before the book, and I explained what I was trying to do. But look, I had no interest in doing, even if he'd been willing, I had no interest in doing an authorized biography. I've done those. I did one. And it would be a very different book than this one. And it would be one where I wouldn't have been making the choices, and where I wouldn't have been able to interpret events or be honest in that sense. It would be somebody else's work. It would be somebody else's vision of themselves. I wanted to write an independent biography, and I guess that's the way I like to look at it, rather than unauthorized. It's independent of him. He chose not to participate, which was no surprise, and we arrived at kind of a gentleman's agreement about how I would proceed. Now, even after that, look, I'm telling you, there were all kinds of barriers thrown up. But, there are always ways, and if you're a reporter, there are always ways to find the story and to get into the story and to take a tact on the story. Look, that's the process. That's why there's something here that's different. And I think, look, I'm not saying it's the whole truth, but it is a truth. It is not the entire story, but it is a story that's, I think, is fair and as complete as we're ever going to get. And I think gets at something that, honest to God, I wouldn't have been able to get at if it had been Bobby Orr's authorized biography. I think it's different.